Welcome to the last of the current series of the Irish Rural Link webinars. And this morning, we're talking about funding opportunities for communities in 2021. My name is Seamus Boland, and I would certainly like to introduce you to, at the beginning, Deirdre Mortell, CEO of Rethink Ireland and a social entrepreneur in residence at Connect Trinity College Dublin. Deirdre has 20 years experience, as she would say, as she says, changing the world in one step at a time. It's a good process, sometimes by leading and sometimes by contributing in a team set to deliver high growth at a one step at a time. She's been CEO of One Foundation, which pioneered venture philanthropy in Ireland and Europe, and she was also a board member of EVPA. She co-authored, established a venture philanthropic fund in Europe, a practical guide to European funding, and is certainly one of the most influential people in the area of funding. Frances Howard, Senior Philanthropic and Development Advisor, the Community Foundation for Ireland. A community foundation do, of course, tremendous work in reaching out to the communities, as we know. She joined in 2020 after serving as head of major gifts at Trócaire, and previously was a philanthropic advisor in various organizations, including Cancer Control in Geneva. She comes from applied social research from Trinity College Dublin and has a diploma in project management from the Institution of Commercial Management. You're very welcome. Muriel Farrell. Muriel is the program lead in the Sláinte Care program and at their implementation office. Currently program lead, as she says, leads the Sláinte Care Integration Funds project. There's something like 122 projects at around the cost of 20 million euro. Some of the services also include in the HSE, the National Primary Care Division, Regional Director of Operations Office, Dublin Northeast, Our Lady's Hospice, Navan, Mead Hospital Group, and many others. So you're very welcome, Muriel, and we will hear a great deal about Sláinte Care in this discussion. Greg Stratton, I would like to welcome you. You're Assistant Principal Officer in the Department of Health. Greg Stratton is involved in the previously CEO of Spiriton Asylum Services Initiative. This is an extremely important initiative and has certainly made a great impact. So you're welcome. Paul Skinner from Pobal, Director of Community Support and Services. Paul has worked diligently with communities all across Ireland. Many of them are in receipt of funding from Pobal, and Paul's job is to ensure that the best value in the world, in one sense, is given, but also tremendous assistance, because communities need capacities in terms of organising funding and making sure it's spent in the best possible way. So all of you are welcome. Thank you very much for coming on board. We have a good audience, and I will say to you, the audience, please use the chat box to ask questions as you see fit, because I think in this day and age, particularly at the moment, funding is a real problem. As you know, local community groups require funding. It doesn't matter how brilliant the idea is, how fantastic the need is. In order to bring it out in the current situation, we do need funding, and we do need a continuous stream of funding. So maybe I'll begin the webinar by asking you all around the table, in terms of looking at the current realities, particularly, I suppose, COVID-19, I hope we'll be able to have a discussion that we don't mention it, but unfortunately we do. We know many communities are really at the forefront in trying to fill gaps and maintain some sort of continuity for people. So on that basis, what do you think, what's the real demands and needs, and how are you and your organization managing this? I'll start with Deirdre, if you don't mind. Would you like to start with that?
Yes, thank you very much, Seamus, and I want to thank you and your team at Irish Rural Link for inviting me. It's the first time I've spoken at one of your events, so I'm delighted to meet you all. So First of all, look, this has been a year like no other for communities and for funders of communities as a result. I'm stating the obvious, I think, to everybody on this call. Maybe just to say a little bit, so I'm the CEO of Rethink Ireland, and what we do is we provide funding and capacity building supports to innovations that address critical social issues here in the Republic of Ireland. So what does that mean anyway? So it means that we do open calls for applications. All of our open calls are advertised heavily through our social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. And also through our website at rethink_Ireland.ie. We don't have a cycle. So it's not like every year in January it's this and in March it's that. We raise funds, and as we raise funds, we open calls. So I would invite communities to keep a tight eye on those. What we do specifically is that we raise funds philanthropically, either from individuals, families, or companies. Those funds are matched by government, usually from the Department of Rural and Community Development. And with that, we open a fund. We do an open call on a particular issue, and I'll give you an example now in a moment. And specifically then, successful awardees, and we call the awardees rather than grantees, is because we provide cash grants, but we also provide associated capacity building supports, because the grants are aimed at helping your community to grow and spread its innovation. And we know that a lot of the time the organization or people who've started up the innovation don't necessarily have the skills to grow it, but that's okay, because we're going to help you do that with the non-financial supports. So maybe just to give you an example, our Social Enterprise Development Fund has had awardees from all 26 counties in Ireland over the last 3 years. We actually have focused the awardees into awardees that are focused on rural issues, urban issues, and town-based issues, and we select them that way. And they provide cash grants in the range between 10,000 and 50,000. As well as an accelerator program and some specific non-financial supports. And what that looks like is, for example, a grant to do some strategic planning with a consultant, or a grant to develop your communications plan, or whatever else it might be that your particular innovation needs in order to help it grow. So that's just a very quick whip through what we do.
Excellent, and we'll come back in terms of more examples, I'm sure. If I may come to you, Paul, in Pobble, certainly you have a wide outreach, I suppose, in terms of the communities, and I know you've been busy during COVID as well. How is the situation, and what are the demands that you're seeing?
Seamus, good morning. And again, thank you for the invitation to be on the panel this morning. And hello to all the attendees on the webinar. So delighted to be here. At the moment, to answer your question, Seamus, yeah, there's been a lot of work done to articulate very specific needs because of the situation at the moment. And as Deirdre said, yeah, I mean, it's who would have thought at this time of year that we would be in the situation we'd be in. So there is a range of programs, because obviously Pobble as an organization administers programs on behalf of government, but there is a range of very particular initiatives in light of those needs that communities have articulated that we are supporting sort of government to deliver. So you're probably all on the call are probably familiar with the stability scheme, which very particularly government identified the key challenges for communities and particularly organizations whose traded income or their fundraising had dropped. So that scheme in particular was an effort where that loss was there to support those organizations. And then in some of the programs, Seamus, there's a range of other very specific supports, not necessarily delivered by Pobble, but by a range of organizations locally, like local development companies, and obviously like like councils. And I suppose what we're seeing at the moment as well, Seamus, that there continues to be a demand for very particular things in light of the situation that organizations, and particularly community organizations, are in. And again, I would expect that government would be looking to continue to support those, and we would be assisting them to administer those programs. So maybe I'll leave it there for the moment.
Okay.
Unless there's particular questions on programs.
Okay, and again, to people looking in, if you look at the questions and answer box at the bottom of your screen, we will take some questions. Greg, I know in the Department of Health, you certainly are probably very busy. You're probably trying to, because health, of course, and the whole issue of health is in the middle of the current crisis, and in fact dominates everything about it. Yet the community groups, I don't know if you come across many of them, or the voluntary services depend a great deal, and you and everyone else depends on them too during the COVID crisis. How do you see your department managing this, or what's it been like for you?
Well, it's been an exceptionally busy year for the department. From a Healthy Ireland perspective, we have been, we launched the Community Resilience Fund in the last couple of weeks, being administered through Pobble, and in conjunction with our colleagues in Sláintecare. So it's great to have Muriel and Paul on this call as well. So we have seen quite a lot of surveys coming back indicating very significant mental health challenges, very significant difficulties within community. And in the government plan that was launched in September for living with COVID, there was a commitment to supporting community resilience. So we've put together a package of supports that we hope will provide that through the Community Resilience Fund, to help people keep active, to stay connected. So reducing isolation, switching off and being creative. So using creativity as a way for people to cope with the current situation, looking after how people eat. So a lot of people maybe slipping into bad habits in terms of their nutrition. And then also addressing some of those really difficult mental health issues that are currently out there. So managing your mood. We're utilising the existing network of the Healthy Ireland Fund, which is through the local community development committees and the local authorities, as well as through the CYPSEs, the Children and Young Person Services Committees, which are nationally distributed. So at the moment, we're distributing about 107,000 euros to each local authority, 67,000 to the smaller ones, and about €500,000 through the different CYPSEs. So altogether, we're spending a budget of about €6 million just to look after community resilience in sort of direct response to those issues that are arising at the moment. And we're currently finalizing that.
Yeah, I have to say some reaction coming in on my text are certainly praising the work that you've done along with Pobble and others as well, and all of you in fact, because communities certainly have not been left stranded according to this text here. Francis, Community Foundation Ireland, again, a long time supporter of communities. How are you faring up in all of this?
Well, yeah, well, community is in our name, so that's the first thing to say. So communities are very much at the heart of what we do and why we were founded. So hello to everyone viewing and to the panelists. Hopefully some of you are familiar with this and some of you may not be. The Community Foundation is a philanthropic organisation that was set up 20 years ago, and based on the model really that originated in the States, that gave a way for people to contribute back to their communities. So at the core of what we do is donor advice funds, whereby we connect donors with causes in the community. So we facilitate families and companies that want to set up a donor advice fund to give back to particular areas. So that might be certain themes or certain communities. And we also do our own grant making as well. So we have a real mix of, we have many open rounds usually during the year, some on behalf of donors and some from our own grant making as well. Very much focused on community development and support. So we work with the smallest organisations right up to grant making, with some of the large organisations in Ireland as well. And we've gone from strength to strength each year since we've been set up. And this year really what we've seen is a huge surge in philanthropic giving. So our grant making this year is going to be around 15 million, which is almost double the grants that we actually gave out last year. So we've actually seen a huge response in terms of donors certainly wanting to contribute and to give back to communities, which is fantastic. So the Community Foundation, like everyone else, you know, what happened in March was obviously such a huge shock to the system and to our communities. So we launched a COVID response fund quite quickly in March, and that secured donations of around 3 million, which were granted out then. The vast majority of that has been granted out and went out in open call in March, April and May to different community groups and organisations to help them cope through that initial response. And we were lucky enough to be involved in RTE Comic Relief as well earlier this year. So there was around 3 million raised from the public and 3 million was matched then from the Department of Community and Rural Affairs. So that's been a fantastic process, and we're very much cognizant of making sure that that money was spread through communities throughout Ireland. So there was an open call for those funds, and actually those grants are going to be announced next week. And there's over 650 grants being given from that fund to community groups of all sizes in every county in Ireland, which is fantastic. And that's very much was focused on crossing the digital divide, so enabling community groups to move their services online where they needed to, and also to adapt and respond around capacity building where organisations needed to adapt services. Because we're all very familiar with the difficulties community groups have had to continue their services in the current circumstances. So that was certainly a huge need that we hope has been somewhat met through this fund as well. But just to say as well, we're involved in a number of research projects, and every 2 years we do, it's called Vital Signs Research, where we reach out to community groups to ask their insights and advice around what the key issues are. And we did a mini vital signs research piece in September to get a sense from community groups how they were coping with the COVID and the impact on services this year. So again, very telling. And I know Greg had mentioned it, but around mental health and concern, I think just to speak back to where community groups might be finding themselves around this year, maybe there being a surge of support, but looking into the future and looking to next year, you know, is that going to be sustained? You know, where is the funding going to come from into next year and the following year, even after this initial surge of support from statutory and philanthropic organisations? So that's certainly something we've been hearing back this year, and the need for multi-annual funding. But I would just encourage people as well, any open grant rounds that the Community Foundation do are advertised through our newsletter. So if you go onto our website, communityfoundation.ie, you can sign up for that, and it's monthly, it goes out, and any open grant rounds that are available will be advertised through that.
Excellent. Lots of questions, I'm sure, coming in, and I see them already coming up on the questions and answers. Can I ask you, Muriel Sláintecare, and I know you've an integration fund and etc. How is the current situation affecting you? Just switch on your microphone there, Muriel. Your microphone, yeah, thank you. Off you go.
Okay, Seamus, and again, thank you for inviting us here today. As you mentioned, I'm the lead for the Sláintecare Integration Fund. And very simply, you know, the goal of Sláintecare is to improve the patient experience and to have the right services provided by the right person at the right time. And there's wide recognition of how the work of community groups and the wider voluntary sector are driving the vision of Sláintecare. And we do want to continue this by building on what is working well. And I think that was very evident during, particularly during COVID, and the momentum that was built up in terms of getting citizens and communities involved, and we want to keep that going. As you mentioned, we did a 20 million fund, Sláintecare Integration Fund in 2019 was established, and that was to test, it was quite new, it was to test innovative models of care for up to a period of a year, and that was due to finish in December this year. And the criteria for that funding when it was announced was projects that would promote the engagement and empowerment of citizens in the care of their own health, or would scale and share examples of best practice and processes for chronic disease management and the care of older people, because we know that people with chronic diseases and older people make up the majority of attendances at ED and subsequently admissions to hospital, which are avoidable. And then to encourage the other element of criteria was to encourage innovations in the shift of care to the community, and to have hospital avoidance. So really, in terms of Sláinte care, the goal is to keep people well at home or as near to home as possible, and obviously communities are very important in that. So there was initially 122 projects selected, and the fund was 20 million, and it was almost half of the projects actually were the community groups and some of the wider Section 39 voluntary sector. So almost half of the money actually went to the community groups. And in fact, there were a number of additional projects funded when COVID commenced there in March. So a lot of the mental health services and community groups involved in mental health services were given additional funding. So the kind of community and wider kind of community groups involved in delivering the projects were, the local sports partnerships, community drugs teams, the men's sheds, there were some education institutions, and as I mentioned, some of the bigger Section 39s. And I suppose in terms of criteria and all of that, they're very much working as part of, complementing maybe services that are being provided by the statutory services. So that's an important element of the selection when we look at community services. And the kind of things they were doing is, community social prescribing, which a lot of your members are probably very familiar with, and is now a programme for government. So community social prescribing is a really good example of where this was something that people in small pockets around the country, based on research and based on some of their maybe small seed funding they got, were showing that this could impact on people's lives and avoid maybe hospital stays or visits to GPs and generally improve their quality of life. But there wasn't kind of a significant pot of money to give to that in recent years. So the Integration Fund actually funded nearly six projects overall throughout the country. And the results are good coming through from those projects, and particularly during COVID, obviously, because all of the community groups, and Paul would testify to this, all of our community group projects continued during COVID. And I think that was a real testament to the agility and to the resilience and the ability of the community to adapt to changing situations and emerging situations and situations that nobody could plan for. So there was a lot of online solutions and virtual solutions adapted by community groups who didn't, let COVID knock them down. They adapted because of the commitment to the clients that they were serving, and indeed to, testament of their own particular passion to do the right thing. So that the community projects have been really very successful in that respect. And going back to social prescribing, that is now in the programme for government. And as those projects continue and will come to an end, there's a piece of research happening with those. So hopefully we'll be able to look at how those projects will be mainstreamed into the wider health system through the HSE. And that's just one example. I mean, there's other fine examples of the kind of initiatives that the community groups were delivering in terms of what the original funding was, but really stood to us well and to citizens well during COVID, like the Age Well Companions system and the Western Alzheimer's befriending service. All those befriending services found other ways of connecting with the citizens, and particularly for people with chronic diseases, mental health, and older people and vulnerable groups. So Pobble, as Paul mentioned, is a huge support to us in managing all of our projects. And the focus, and I've mentioned this already, and there's research in some of them, but the focus and what we find particularly interesting dealing with the community groups is their focus on outputs and outcomes, and how many of these groups came to us with research and the opportunities for research built into their bid. And that's going to be, again, very valuable, because we had a guy from Deeper working with us in the office for the last year. And it's always interesting to see what the Department of Public Expenditure expect to see in a bid when they get their bids for funding. And outputs and outcomes are really important to being able to demonstrate value for money. And again, those kind of things were very strong in the applications and in the projects that were selected. We're nearly at a stage now where some of the projects start finished. The evaluation of the outcome are available to us in the next month or two for some of those. And again, as I said, we'll be looking at how to mainstream those. So yeah, so our work is ongoing, and the strength and the relevance of the community is very, very important and very obvious.
Very good, Muriel. Thank you. You answered an awful lot of questions that were occurring to me as you were speaking. So nicely put. We will come back to you about some of the individual projects. Deirdre, I see you've been busy as well. You've been answering a question along with Paul that in terms of, I think Paddy Shea, Paddy was wondering about where you get resources. You can get them, the Wheels Resources and Active Link is a good place to look for information. So that was supported by Paul as well. So I appreciate that. And so Deirdre, in terms of, and you want to look at Innovate Together COVID-19 Fund, I suppose it's just coming to that. Organizations probably are, you know, they're dealing with the normal requirements, and suddenly COVID-19 has upended not just them, but everyone else, I suppose, in all sorts of way. And I think you wanted to mention about the Innovate Together COVID-19. So could you elaborate?
Yeah, thanks, Seamus. So Paul mentioned the Government Stability Fund, which I think was an incredibly important initiative there in the late spring, early summer. And linked to that, they decided that in addition to the Stability Fund, they should apply 10% of the total fund to support innovations that emerged from COVID-19. So really to recognize that actually communities are actually in the middle of a massive crisis and pandemic. Communities are actually innovating like mad, actually, kind of invisibly at grassroots, but actually like mad. And so they allocated 5 million of that total fund to innovation, and they asked us to manage it and to raise funds in association with that. So we raised 600,000 additionally, so that became a 5.6 million euro fund that we called the Innovate Together Fund. And we did an open call at 2 stages during the summer, in May and in September. And we're just making the final grants out of that fund at the moment, actually this week. But essentially, what I wanted to say is that there are good news stories out of the COVID-19, and many of you on the call already know that at your own local level. But I think what we're completely missing at national level is to recognize that. And we really, we believed it was happening. But the Innovate Together Fund we were absolutely deluged. We had 550 applications. We made 70 grants, totaling 5.6 million. We were looking at a wide range of issues there. So obviously health was a big part, health and resilience, but also we looked at the planet as well as people. So we looked at social inclusion, vulnerable groups, but we also looked at things like biodiversity. Because in fact, if we think about it, where did the pandemic come from? It actually came from a virus hopping from an animal to the human population, which is because of too close proximity compared to the past. So we thought we need to look wider. We need to look at sustainable Ireland. We need to look at circular economy. So there was a very wide range of topics there. So we've made about 70 grants, 5.6 million. They're all on our website. We actually just announced the round 2 yesterday. So they're currently on our social media. But to give you a flavor of some of the health-based ones, we supported Crisis Text Line, which is helping young people experiencing additional mental health issues, which could be serious mental health issues, or it could be just anxiety. I hate to say just anxiety, but compared to what it could be. We helped a lot of organizations to go online, and very often, and I love this example, the MS Society, right? Many of you will have loved ones with MS. The MS Society, as you know, offers local and regional exercise and physical exercise groups. That was no longer possible. So they took it online. But what became possible because of that was that they could actually focus their exercise groups based on the level of need you had, because everybody's at different stages of MS. So before it used to be, well, if I live in Athlone, I'm going to the Athlone group. Now you can be in an exercise group with people in Ireland who are either in the early stages, the mid stages, or the late stages. So you can get more specialist help with actually specialist nurses and physiotherapists on the call. So that's what I mean by innovating. They didn't just go online, but they actually said, we can do something better. And they had the imagination and the drive to do something better in the context of that. So I wanted to say thanks to the Department of Rural and Community Development for committing to innovation in the middle of a crisis, because it was a brave choice. And also to our donors. We had a number of corporate donors, including Zurich, who came in behind that. But most importantly, I think it shows what communities did and the courage and bravery and drive people showed when we could have all just got into bed and got under the duvet, let's face it.
Thank you, dear Paul. There's a number of technical questions, some of which I don't know you can really answer them. Mel Crow is looking at projects already underway and may need consultancy fees, etc. And there's a few other questions like that. I suspect the answer is to do with how they are set up in the first place and who's funding them. But are you coming across extra demands, Paul? You know, organizations doing their normal stuff and suddenly changed with the current crisis?
Seamus, we are. I probably didn't in my introduction reference that in the range of programs that we are delivering at the moment, either on behalf of the Department of Rural and Community Development or the Department of Health or the Department of Social Protection, that in our work with those organizations on the ground, that we have both identified the extent to which they have had to change their approaches and have had to look for support to do that, or have had to increase the level of support and again look for support to do that. And I suppose the existing programs that are in place, the government and the departments have continued to support those particular programs, and in some instances have provided additional support in order to allow that to happen. So there has been, for the community services program, for example, an additional support fund in order to assist in the time that we're working within. But I noted in some of the chat, Seamus, and there is, if it was the case, in addition to where ourselves and other organizations might sit nationally, there is a range of local organizations that I suspect a number of people, excuse me, already engage with. But the local development companies that are there obviously do provide a range of different supports. And again, through the department, additional funding has been given to them to meet some of that extra demand at the moment, as well as obviously that what Greg mentioned in terms of the local and community development committees through the local authority. And I suppose there is locally those structures that I think obviously continue to try and address and support organizations with the various challenges, and departments have supplemented existing funding that's there. On the specific question I think that Mel was asking around, there is probably if there is an ask, for example, with regard to consultancy and particularly consultancy, yeah, there are some, particularly perhaps in the local development companies, opportunities to seek support for that type of engagement with an organization. The architect's fees, I understand, would normally perhaps, Seamus, be part of the overall kind of proposal that might go forward, the capital proposal that might go forward. But again, with some of these, quite happy to take them offline if need be, Seamus, to follow up if people want to follow up with me, directly on them. Yeah.
Seamus, you're
there, Seamus.
Oh, my own microphone is. Can you hear me now? Usual question.
Could I just come in with a point there, Seamus, just quickly? Just to follow up on what Paul and Deirdre were saying there, I think it's really interesting. And with any crisis, brings change. So there's always disruption in the sense that there's obviously the great innovations and that are coming out from community organisations and groups and what's happening. There's also going to be changes in terms of how groups operate and, some being able to grow and some maybe contracting and so on. And just to mention that the Community Foundation actually have a small merger fund, if that's of interest to any organisations, and really is to provide seed funding for organisations that want to explore the option of maybe merging with one or more other organisations. And just in the context of so much change, that might be something that some groups are considering, and that we do have a rolling open round fund available for that if anyone has an interest to visit our website.
Yeah, and that's an excellent fund and an excellent opportunity as well. I know organisations who have merged have benefited very well from that. I suppose I was looking at some of the text coming in on my Twitter machine, as it were. Greg, a lot of people are talking about mental health, anxiety, and I know Deirdre touched on that as well. And it's hard to see what initiatives can actually help. I know in Irish Rural Link, we worked along with the Wheel and others to call to people's houses. Certainly during the first lockdown, that was a major program we were involved in, which was supported very thankfully by the Department of Rural Community, Gaeltacht. Can I ask you, from what you're hearing in terms of mental health, anxiety, what are issues coming back to you like?
Yeah, so I mean, we all know that the impact of the pandemic on mental health is quite significant across the population, and in particular with vulnerable groups. So I don't know. I think there are things that you can do to prevent mental health becoming a much bigger issue, and I know that the HSC have put in extra supports over this period. And a lot of that can be accessed through the community call initiatives that are running through the local authorities at the moment. I don't know how active those call lines are at present. We have been meeting with them on a weekly basis. But I think that what we're trying to do through our Community Resilience Fund is to try to prevent those things from escalating by keeping people active, by keeping people eating well and those kinds of things. So I think it's and those are the things that happen at local level and within community. And I don't know how if that's an answer to that question or not.
No, I think in terms, I suppose in rural terms, Greg, there's a lot of isolation anyway, and loneliness comes into it. And I suppose we're often concerned that we're able to reach out to people, or local community organizations are able to reach out to people, and sometimes that could be bringing supplies. People have been isolating and having to, because of older situations, because of disability, because of all sorts of reasons. I suppose it's just highlighting the need that we can reach out to them. I think that was what I was thinking of.
Yeah, and what's it through the community call initiative, we've been working with the guards who might call out to people, working with An Post. Sometimes it's the postman or the delivery man who's delivering a package in to the older person who might engage with them. Volunteering Ireland and the local befriending services. So a lot of what we're trying to fund as well is trying to reduce that isolation. I think it's a very important issue at this time. I think a lot of it was picked up in the first kind of wave. I don't know how much focus is being put back onto it and how much people are thinking about it at the moment. But there's certainly lots of stuff underway within the local authorities. I know that the local authorities all have their community call forums, and we have a subgroup of that forum now looking at these issues.
Muriel, kind of leading on from that, you mentioned men's sheds and you mentioned activities like that. Have you come across any particular project, maybe it is the men's sheds, that deal with this kind of loneliness?
Yeah, I think Seamus, when I was just thinking that I was talking there, and the first one that came to mind was the men's sheds. But the other one that came to mind was the Alone and the huge work that's happening there, and that Alone had what they called, what was it called? I can't remember now the name. It was some sort of hub service model that they had working prior to COVID. And again, they were training, they were employing people who were working in communities, and really, I'm sure a lot of your members probably know about this already, but it was very much around connecting people to the service, connecting people to the service, and connecting the services with each other using technology and all of those kind of things. And I think Alone became very significant then. When more significant, not that they weren't beforehand, more significant when COVID came, and there was additional funding given to Alone to scale up that hub service model and have more people in the community. And they were working very closely with the local community care areas, which is probably something, if I get a chance to talk about later, I'd like to talk about that. So Alone certainly is a big contributor for the kind of people you're talking about, particularly in the elderly age group. Social prescribing I mentioned as well. Again, it's playing a blinder where there are projects available or whether our projects running. Again, they're focusing and supporting people with both chronic diseases and people with who need mental health care and support. And this is about enabling people to link and encouraging self-care and self-management, but doing that in a supportive way. And as you mentioned, then the men's sheds as well.
Thank you for that, Francis. And others will probably take up this. Tom Lavin, chairperson of Irish Rural Link, is asking, what additional supports or new initiatives are being thought about to put in place to assist newly unemployed? I don't know if that comes into Community Foundation's remit or maybe comes into Rethink Ireland, but the unemployment situation is an issue. Are there groups looking for help from you in this area, and what sort of help are they looking for?
That's an interesting one. And actually, when Muriel and Deirdre were speaking there, I was thinking of how the pandemic this year has highlighted sort of maybe newer cohorts of more vulnerable people that sort of brought to light, in the sense of maybe people who previously didn't need help, or it hadn't been highlighted in the same way. I think it certainly drew attention to some groups of people that needed additional support. Like, for example, we funded a project with the Children's Rights Alliance right at the start of the lockdown, which was really around, and it was an emergency project in the sense of bringing hot meals to children of preschool age who were actually getting meals in creche situations, but that didn't have, whose families needed support to provide that. And they were sort of falling through the loops of some of the existing services that were already there, which were more focused on primary school aged children or secondary school aged. So again, it just sort of highlighted almost a gap in the system in terms of maybe some families who previously hadn't been identified as being supported by community groups that actually, in an urgent sense, needed support. And I think that's happened throughout the year, that in terms of loneliness even, and people that we mightn't previously have thought of as needing support in that sense, maybe now are seen more vulnerable through isolation or single person households. But certainly those unemployed through COVID are also sort of rising in that sense as well. It hasn't been something that's particularly been a focus through the grant making, or that's come through for us to date, but we do work a lot on education and sort of youth unemployment in that area. So certainly it's going to be something that will feature particularly into next year.
I'd say it will, and thanks for that, Francis. Deirdre, I know, Rethink, you do a lot of social enterprise stuff, and in a way the pandemic payments for unemployed have greatly assisted a lot of people at the moment, but nonetheless, jobs probably will be under threat, and this may emerge next year. Does this come into your remit at all?
Yes, it does actually, in a couple of different ways actually. So first of all, in relation to Innovate Together and our COVID-19 response fund, reskilling the workforce was one of the categories where we invited applications. Now, we were actually very surprised. We had a really low number of applications. So my feeling is that maybe the community wasn't quite ready yet with its innovations at that stage, because we would have liked to have done more grant making. So just to give you a quick example, we only made 3 grants in the last round that we announced yesterday. One is to the Forage Enterprise Centre in Girth, County Galway, which is reskilling people for remote work. So maybe you need digital skills or other skills in order to work remotely. Completely different, the Irish Theatre Institute. So practically every actor in Ireland's out of work at the moment. And again, it's providing a mixture of online mental health and resilience supports and peer supports, but also skills to take your work online. So that you might be able to have more work if you can find an audience online. And so they're just two like completely different grants that we've made. But I think the other grantee we have in our social enterprise program is Grow Remote, who many of you will be familiar with. And they're really focused on, you know, if people don't need to work in offices anymore, how can you work remotely and earn a decent wage while working at home anywhere in the country? You might be living on the top of Grove Patrick. And they're working with both employers and employees on remote working skills, but also job placements as well. So that, you know, sometimes there are actually jobs advertised through their site. So they're well worth taking a look at as well.
Yeah, I have a lovely image of living on the top of Croagh Patrick and in December. But anyway, that's a nice touch.
Seamus, can I just come in on that as well? Just to reference.
Yes,
yeah,
please.
just to answer, or maybe just to contribute to Tom's question. In particular, as it relates to the one or two of the programs delivered by the Department of Rural and Community Development, most particularly the Social Inclusion and Community Activation Program, which would be a substantial program on their behalf that does seek to address social exclusion. And the design of that program is due in 2021. So there is obviously some thought being given to the kind of question that Tom has around how to deal with the situation and the new unemployed. And likewise, the community services program is due for redesign in 2021. And again, that's one of the areas that I'm sure is going to be, you know, part of the discussions around the new context and the new situation that needs to be dealt with. So just to say that.
Thank you, Paul. I think I just seen a text coming in about the community service program, and that's very helpful. Mary Casserly, thank you for sending in your question, Mary. She's wondering, when is the Sláinte Care open for applications? So I don't know if you dealt with that, but just to repeat it again. Just your microphone there, Mary, or Muriel. Mary. Just open your microphone, please. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that, James. Yes, there's no commitment as yet to funding for 2021 for the Sláinte Care Integration Fund, but if that changes, we will link in with yourself so that you can link in with the members if, as I said, if that changes. Yeah,
that was a very specific question, and that's thank you for asking that question. I think in terms of I suppose looking into 2021, Greg, I'm kind of coming to you. Maybe you have a little knowledge on what the thinking is in terms of how COVID will pan out. Have you done any research, or are you going to do any kind of thinking about what way you'll deal with 2021? And I see questions saying one of the reasons we're not affected yet for unemployment or hardship is because, in fairness, the government have been very good at strengthening people's incomes, or at least putting a cover underneath it to make sure that people don't drop out. But what's your thinking of 2021? Very hard to predict, but look, we're starting out early at this stage. So what do you think?
I don't think anybody would want to predict anything in the current context, no, I think people are becoming aware of I mean, with the vaccine currently kind of out there, that there will be a kind of a post-COVID reality or context or something like that's going to emerge. So I know that there's sort of discussion around what that might be, what those challenges might be once we get kind of over this. I think that COVID will probably be a reality for some time in 2021 anyway. So it's something that will be around. but you know, and I think for funders, we're going to need to be able to respond to that and to the emerging issues that arise. I think the unemployment is one of them, but I think there will be probably many more that we'll need to be able to address. And I think the best approach to that is probably working still with our local authority areas, with our local authorities and with our local community development committees and the existing structures to identify what those are locally, and to kind of address them. But yeah, I think the current context has taught us that you just can't predict the future.
Exactly. An interesting question from Martin Smith. I think that's Martin, former chair of IRL. I hope it is, or it sounds like him anyway. And I wonder, Francis, maybe in Community Forum, that he's wondering really about applications funding cooperative structures. You were talking about mergers and stuff. Is there much funding available for organizations trying to find or put together a structure in terms of how they operate?
As starting up as an organization, is it? Or
yeah, I think he's talking about maybe a number of groups coming together and forming a cooperative. Which in a way is a merger,
certainly. No, it's an interesting concept, and I'd suggest they should make contact with the Community Foundation if they had a proposal or idea around that. Sort of vis-a-vis the merger fund, because the idea of that fund is to enable sort of groups if they to come together, and if they feel they can be more effective together or to streamline or work together. That's what it's about, really. It is responding to that need where communities want to work together. And the structures around it. So yeah, I think they should definitely get in touch if there's ideas around that through the fund.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I think it is a very interesting suggestion. I know, Paul, Pobble do help groups as well in terms of, and perhaps the partnerships when they go in to talk to them as well. I think your advice earlier is go in and talk to your local partnership with ideas. There are development people there. Can you contact Pobble directly as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Seamus. We do have a team across programs of development coordinators, but you get all the details on our website at pobble.ie. But if there is obviously any particular questions in light of this discussion, if people want to email me, absolutely, we'll direct them. But on that particular, the programs that we are delivering at the moment, and I'm just thinking of the community services program, there's no issue in terms of that structure, in terms of having a co-op structure that would deliver some of those community services. So it certainly is, and I do think it's probably going to grow as an approach or as a legal structure. But absolutely, we would welcome applications with those structures.
Yeah, I again, Pobble, look, I biased here, of course, and former chair of Pobble, and I have to say the impact they've had on society over the last 20, 30 years is fantastic. So I think that those opportunities are there. Here's a general question that's come in, and I think all of you can look at this and see if you were to offer tips, 2 or 3 very, what would you call it, strong tips for groups thinking of looking for funding. Who wants to take that question first? Just what would be the 2 things you'd say to them? Who wants to come in there? Muriel, you've unmuted, so you must be in.
Yeah, I was thinking about this one actually coming in. So again, think about your offering and how your offering can best meet the needs of the local populations. And I mentioned earlier, the community organizations have a tremendous value, and I think they're stronger. We say we're stronger together, and I think I would encourage them to start looking at connecting, if they're not already, with their local health services. And health services at the moment are undergoing reform along with COVID and everything else. And the idea is that we have our services organised in a way to serve specific populations and smaller populations. So Sláinte Care is about population-based planning, so looking at the needs of local populations. So, I mean, what would be stronger than having, you know, the statutory services and the community services working together, you know, pooling, you know, their information, their knowledge to identify the needs of those local populations up to maybe 50,000. And then obviously, you know, as people were talking about earlier, you know, the potential for mergers. But so that brings me back to the point, you know, look at what you're offering and how that can best meet a need that's there in the community. And then in advance of a funding call out, invest some time becoming familiar with the needs of the local community and the priorities, and then the strategic, how they're linked to strategic priorities, because, you know, it's what's important in terms of policy or the programme for government or the HSE operational priorities. They're the kind of things that are, you know, is where I suppose funding will come from, if funding is going to come at all. And you're all familiar with those areas then around disability and mental health and older persons and chronic disease and vulnerable groups. And then think about what your service is providing. Is it, you know, is there an evidence base? Have you done a smaller project around, you know, whatever the funding call is about? And is there evidence and is there research? And this is something that the community groups are really strong on. And then, you know, plan and do some more planning, you know, have good outcomes and outputs thought through. So think at the beginning, think about what you're going to actually deliver and how that's going to be kind of tangible. So think about what your outcomes and your outputs might look like, and then work back from that in terms then of, you know, how you'll deliver it, what resources you need, what staff you need, what equipment you need, buildings, you know, have a good plan in terms of the actions and the milestones and who's responsible. And most of all, and Paul will probably agree with me on this one, do accurate costings, you know, look at your costings and go back and look at them a second time. So they were really
okay. Thanks, Muriel. That's a really good answer. You probably covered all the advice that everyone else is going to give as well. But you're right. What are the statutory people doing? Because it's often worth asking. Paul, you're trying to come in there, I think. But I think, Paul, I suppose you'd agree with that. I suppose it's even though costings is a big issue, but look, there's help to be got there too, isn't there? Yeah, there is, Seamus. I think Muriel covered a lot of it. I would say great to start with if there is, you know, an organisation that's looking at particular initiatives, because it is quite difficult at the moment to identify and to you know, look at what the supports and that might be. But absolutely, there is, and I just put in the chat there, Seamus, there's a couple of sort of documents that we have that might assist people if they're thinking of making an application and if they want tips around writing an application that are up on our website there. But look, I think Muriel was very clear around, it is important being clear on what your objective is, what your outcomes are, and if, as I think Muriel was suggesting, it can be done in partnership, because I think that does assist and help people in terms of the ongoing kind of delivery that might be possible. So, and again, as I said, we're there to support people if there are particular asks that people have. Okay. As usual, we're coming towards the end. Unfortunately, time flies when especially a subject like this is being covered. And I'd remind people they can watch this on YouTube at the weekend when we put up all our webinars are there to be found. Look, a quick, literally one answer question, 3 or 4 words answers, I should say. Look, if you were the minister for whatever in communities, what would you ask them to do, or the department? What would you say is #1 priority? I'll start with you, Frances. You're thinking very reflection mode there.
Yeah, well, I think that there's been moves in the right direction in that sense, but I think certainly the big issues are, for me, are kind of looking at multi-year funding for community groups and mental health. I think that's going to be the key issue of 2021.
Very good, thank you. Nice and brief. Deirdre, would you have a similar, or what would be your request?
Yeah, so I would agree with Frances, and I think I think there's a need to look at how do we sustain the innovations that got a bit of a a little bit of a boost this year through all of our different funds. Everybody here has been involved in doing that. But also I do agree, I think mental health is going to be the key issue this year, as well as reskilling the workforce, and just reflecting back on the fact that we got such few applications, but it's going to be a huge need. And that's a mixture of both young people coming out of school and college, but also older people who may have lost their jobs. So very different needs.
Greg, I can't see you disagreeing with that, but what would be your simple request?
Yeah, I think multi-annual funding is definitely something that we'd like to be able to offer more of, and I think it gives people a bit more certainty, and it enables outcomes in a much more meaningful way. Yeah, I think supporting more collaboration in funding. So I think we take a very competitive approach generally. I think I'd like to see more partnerships, more people kind of joining together and cooperating on delivery. And I think that's where you actually find innovation, is when you have two very different fields coming together and finding solutions to intractable problems. And I think kind of working singularly is not necessarily the best way about doing that. But yeah.
Okay, thank you. Muriel, very quick.
Sorry about this. Okay, so I agree, collaborative working and a focus on prevention and general health and well-being. Yeah.
Good. And Paul, nearly
I
the
would
last
agree.
word to you.
Well, I would agree with all, and I would also, as Minister, have a National Community Day.
Excellent suggestion. We will put that forward as well. I agree completely with all the panelists. I really like like we've been talking, I suppose, about multi-annual funding. It really is important. But I think this year has shown, and we have to really, as all of you have said, I think Francis, you said it, the government have really stepped up to the plate in helping community groups across the country. And I thought we were at that point in terms of finding out what the statutory and what they're doing really is worth finding out. Rethink Ireland, you have, and really you've been a stalwart in contributing and helping people, as you say in your introduction, step by step changing Ireland. And of course, Community Foundation, stellar work in all of what you do. And of course, if people listening are involved in wishing to donate, I think Deirdre's nodding her head, and so is Francis. Please do that as well, because that is of huge help to everybody. Look, we're coming to the end of the program. We have lots of contributions coming in. I'd like to thank those who came in this morning, all of you who have participated and listened and sent in questions. To the panelists, Francis, thank you so much for your reflection and your thinking. Greg, we got a great view in terms of where you're coming from, particularly around the health issues. Muriel, thank you also. Deirdre, Rethink Ireland, and of course, Paul, old friend of mine, I'm glad to say, from Pobble, who also do fantastic work. There are many others we could have had on this panel this morning, and I'm sure we'll do so again. At this stage, thank you for joining us. Don't be afraid to join Irish Rural Link if you wish, he says, getting the commercial in. And I hope for everybody, you will have a very good and happy Christmas. In the new year, we hope to announce the next series of webinars. So keep watching our website at irishrurallink.ie and have a very good Christmas. Thank you.